I hope in this video I can give a quick and hopefully useful overview on the basics of what wet and dry basis are, how to determine them and how to convert them from one to the other. A good place to start would simply be, what is wet and dry basis? Wet and dry basis are ways of defining a mixture's makeup in terms of mass. So dry basis is a ratio of the mass of the wet substance to the mass of the dry substance. Wet basis is the ratio of the mass of the wet substance to the mass of the dry and wet substance together. Wet and dry basis are often used to describe feed mixtures, where it is important to know the amount of dry and wet substance in the feed in order to carry out mass balances and determining the concentration of the products. Wet and dry basis are also very important figures during drying processes, where determining the drying times may be dependent on knowing these values. Knowing how to work with wet and dry basis should come in handy for you, should you be pursuing a career in process engineering, chemical engineering, or other industrial process related professions. Do note that these slides were not specifically made for this video and were made for my own revision purposes. However, I do feel they give a very clear step-by-step way of determining dry and wet basis. On this first slide you can see I've made it very clear that to determine dry and wet basis, we have to know the composition of the feed. So I've made up a hypothetical table here where we have bone dry solid and moisture. So we have 88 kilograms of bone dry solid and 12 kilograms of moisture. Underneath I've given a clear equation for figuring out dry basis, where we use the mass of the moisture, so 12, over the mass of the bone dry solid, which is 88. And it's always times 100 because dry and wet basis are expressed as percentages. So moving on to wet basis, I've once again made it very clear that we need to know the composition of the feed. So luckily, again we're using the exact same table from working out dry basis, where bone dry solid is 88 and moisture is 12. So this time, the wet basis is the mass of the moisture, once again 12, is equal to the mass of the moisture plus the mass of the bone dry solid. And this is once again times by 100, as it is expressed as a percentage. So far, it's been rather easy, and as long as you don't mix up the two, you shouldn't have any trouble determining dry and wet basis. However, the part that people tend to get muddled up is when you're trying to convert from dry basis to wet basis, or vice versa. Unfortunately, in my revision notes here, I have been a little bit lazy when showing my working, so I'll try and elaborate on this so you and me don't get confused. So when you're trying to convert from dry basis to wet basis, you take your value from your dry basis, which was 13.64 in the first slide, and you put that over 100 plus your mass in moisture, which was 12. And you'll notice that it comes out as 12% for us, which was the same value as when we were determining wet basis in the second slide. So luckily converting from wet basis to dry basis is just as simple, although it's almost in reverse. So you take your value for your wet basis, which was 12%, and you put that over 100 minus your mass in moisture, which is also 12, and we're getting 13.64% out. And that is exactly the same as our previous values for dry basis, so you can see that this method works. So although it is a relatively easy and short topic, I hope this video has covered any uncertainties you had about it. Whether you're seeing this for the first time or if you're simply recapping on previous knowledge, I do hope that this has helped you in some way